If there were ever a person in the world who required no introduction, it would be our next guest. In addition to being the legendary creative force behind some of the most iconic films of our time, Francis Ford Coppola is the visionary behind a portfolio of properties known for local engagement, sustainability, and being downright gorgeous. Please welcome Condé Nast Traveller Editor-in-Chief Melinda Stevens and Francis Ford Coppola.
I'm very excited to be here. I spent the weekend not exploring the streets of New York, but rewatching many of your movies. And I planned to kind of watch them all, but it turns out if you want to see Apocalypse Now, the director's cut, then that's going to take up most of your Sunday.
Actually, it's the middle version of length.
Yes.
It's not the shortest one, and it's not the longest one. It's a Goldilocks version, just right.
That's right. It's an amazing movie, and made me realizing actually that The Godfather 1 and 2 was a kind of walk in the park compared to the kind of visceral, amazing, fantasticalness of that movie. Now, of course, many extraordinary things happened around that filming, of course, which are so legendary. Martin Sheen going through a terrible time with alcohol in that first scene when it opens and he's smashing up the mirror and he's tumbling over the bed. All the stories about Marlon Brando not turning up for set, for example. I know that you'd poured a huge amount of your own money into it. So many things were delayed. Typhoons, weather conditions, et cetera, and of course it's set in Vietnam, but the filming took place in the Philippines, and I wondered whether you had ever gone back to the Philippines.
I did. I liked the Philippines very much. The people were really kind to us, and at that time the Philippines was under martial law. It was President Marcos and his famous wife. But I must say that, you know, the project I did not have the support of the U.S. government, and it needed helicopters and military things, which the Philippines was able to supply. And I must say about them that they made a deal with us and they stuck to it. It wasn't one of those situations where they said, okay, now if you give this bureaucrat some money, you'll get this and that. They were very fair with us, and I came away with great affection for the Philippine people, and that the country's a beautiful country. You know, there were some disturbing things which are still there, but whenever I meet a Filipino, I always like to thank them in their language, and I'm very fond of them.
There was a very sweet story that I read yesterday about how there were kids in the villages behind who used to come down and watch the filming taking place, and for all the helicopters and all the bombing and all the fires and all the extraordinary scenes that were taking place, what really captured their imagination was watching these Americans on surfboards. And a lot of those kids then became surfers.
Became surfers, yeah. And surfing has become a real enterprise there, and a joy for the people, and it was from the scenes from the picture. It's kind of odd how culture touches culture and changes it, and
yes,
you know, it's a great human story of how we're all connected.
Funnily enough, when, again, just talking about The Godfather and watching Apocalypse Now, it seemed to me that there was quite a lot of imagery that affects around a kind of Eden. For example, when the Al Pacino figure goes back to Sicily and meets his young bride, and that kind of crumbling sense of bucolic Edenness, and then when things become the opposite of that, when they become slightly hellish. And And when I was watching The Godfather again, I remember the first time I was watching it, I found it very macho. And the time I watched it this weekend, I found it very tender. And there's the wonderful scenes between Marlon Brando and Al Pacino sitting in these kind of gardens with these flowers and the incredible tenderness between them. Have you always worked hard on that location aspect of your movie, providing these feelings of a kind of Eden?
Well, you know, movies, as you know, as most of these endeavors, is based on a team of people. And I was always blessed to have some wonderful collaborators. My long-term production designer, art director, production designer is the more grandiose term for art director and photographers and what have, was a fellow named Dean Tavaleris. And he did the first Godfather pictures and then retained throughout basically everything I've done. But he also redesigned the winery, and he was involved with Jacques Grange on the Palazzo Margherita in the south of Italy. So basically, you know, I'm a theater guy. I was a theater student. I can explain how I became a theater student if you're interested. But, you know, theater is collaboration. And these projects that you work on, you're dealing with big groups of immense talent. And the director is sort of the coach more than anything else. He tries to make the environment be conducive where people aren't afraid to come up with a wacky idea, because usually it's the crazy ideas that are the good ones. And so, and even over my career, I learned that, you know, regarding actors who are extraordinary artists, when you think about what they do, actors, you hear, oh, that this actor was difficult, or when they talk about Marlon Brando, they said, oh, he didn't do this or do that. The truth of the matter really is that actors, you don't pull the performance out of them. You just make it comfortable for them. And if they're difficult, it's because they're scared. And if you make them know how much you care, respect them, and admire them, it's amazing. The problems just go away. And if anything, through my tempestuous career, where I was always on the verge of getting fired or replaced, it was always the cast and the actors who were in my corner, and not only made the films be more beautiful because of their work, but because they were lined up with me, and also that thing of, you know, that you never pull a performance out. You just set the stage for them, make them comfortable, and they do. You think about an actor, really. If I were going to perform for you, if I was a cellist or a violinist or a trombone player, I'd have this thing between us. The actor is the instrument, so they have nothing between them and the audience. And imagine how terrifying that must be, you know. Any of you who have tried it, I'm sure you know how it's so hard to not be self-conscious. And
your daughter Sophia says that you're a wonderful hotelier because directing and hoteling aren't so dissimilar. How would you describe them as having? What would they have in common?
well, I look at all the various businesses that I've found myself in as really all aspects of show business. I mean, I started in theater as a student, and film is, of course, the descendant or emerged from theater. But, you know, when you think of wine, wine is a bottle of grape juice. If it didn't have a story, if it didn't have a romance to telling that story, it would be totally different kind of a business. But wine is like, who are the owners? In the case of one, it was this soldier who met this woman who was a widow who had a winery, and they fell in love. And it's that story. When you drink it, you're drinking that story. So winery is showbiz. A hotel is a show, without a doubt. The guests are the audience. The servers and the people they interact with are the cast, and the people behind the scenes making the garden stuff, they're the crew. And when you expose it to the public, what the press thinks is the reviews. So I always felt, A lot of people have asked me, well, how do you keep your head straight? My young assistant recently says, how do you keep your head straight with all of these decisions of different things? I said, to me, it's all one big production. Is you know, and I'm really not jumping from project to project. I once did a project, one of the smoothest projects I ever worked on was The Godfather 2, and it was a project that had a modern story in the 50s in Lake Tahoe. It had a old story, it had it's okay, it's sound effects. It had Sicilian story in the old days. It had a New York story in the 20s. It had the Cuban Revolution. It had the Las Vegas sequence. But, you know, when I made it, I didn't think, oh my God, I'm in the Las Vegas sequence. It was just another sequence of a whole movie. Well, today, the different projects, be it the winery or the film work or the thing, is just different like that, different parts of the same production, which is our families putting on a show for our audience and getting our audience to trust the fact that if we make wine, we really drink that wine. We don't make a wine that, well, I don't want to drink that, I want to drink this. So whatever we offer in the winery, we really do. Whatever is in the hotels, we built we didn't get a hotel company to build it. I was in there digging in the sand with the sand flies, which took, at the time, in those days, 2 weeks to subside. So everything in a nutshell, it's like the opposite of The Godfather. It's not business, it's personal. But that's, you know, I never realized that, but that's true. That's a good slogan, we should use that. You know, all of those phrases in The Godfather, I'll make him an offer, I can refuse, it's not personal, it's strictly, all was things said by Mario Puzo's mother.
Stop.
And that's where he got it from.
The
really.
writer's mother, that's wonderful. It occurred to me also that you're quite drawn to risky things. You know, winemaking is risky. You can have a bad season or a blight. Filmmaking is risky. Is that part of the pleasure of these projects? Is the
Well, let's be realistic. You live your life. When you die, you don't want to say, oh, I wish I had done this. I wish I had done that. I wish I had done that. You want to say, gee, I got to do this. I got to do that. I got to see my kids do that. I got to be in the wine business. I got to make movies. And you're going to be so busy saying all the things you got to do that when you die, you won't notice it. So risk. How can you call it risk? It's opportunity. You know, what's the point of not taking any chances? What do you gain when you go on to the next, to the long, anxiety-free slumber for eternity? You might as well take the chance to live and really live.
which segues into your kind of new line of business, which is cannabis.
Which is which?
Cannabis.
Oh, yeah. Cannabis is very...
You just smoked something.
Well, no, cannabis is very mysterious because although it's being made legal state after state, they don't really know, it's not clear really what the laws are. So when California, for example, first made what is cannabis? It's a natural, like grapes, you know, it's a natural agricultural product, which if you prepare gives you certain beneficial effects, and probably if you overconsume negative effects. But it's like wine in a way. I mean, that if it's grown in a certain terroir, it could have many more wonderful. We all know that it could be a peach tree over here and a peach tree over there, and that one has delicious peaches and that one less so. So nature is funny about that, about the little patch of earth it's on and the type of tree it is, giving more wonderful results. And I guess cannabis is the same. I'm not really a super expert, but what I do find tricky, I was curious because I thought it was really similar to wine, being a natural agricultural product that is grown and it's better in one part of the area than terroir than another. But the United States, of course, federally, it's illegal, which means you can't do banking. Then in California, they keep changing the rules, so you can't really distribute it. So I honestly, I thought we had a terrific package for the way we presented cannabis. It was a tin wine bottle, and you could open it up. I thought it was so neat. And I guess I'm the only one who came right out. It's like wine. It's similar, it's an equivalent. It's a type of gift of earth that's not unlike wine. But I'm not sure what's happening in that area. I have to find out what's the latest on it.
I'm interested that the first hotel, funny enough, that you
I have no idea about what she's going to talk about. I had no idea she was going to talk about movies, and I told her in front, I said, don't tell me what you're going to ask me, because I will give you a more sincere answer if I don't know what's coming.
I'm not going to put you on the spot.
You can. I'm getting old, and I've done this kind of have a conversation, and I live for someone to really ask me something that I don't know how to answer. So please do that.
So the question I was going to ask you was,
You can.
do you think, for example, humans make up rules all the time about what should be allowed and what shouldn't be allowed, or what's on trend or what's not on trend? I think we're trying to do the best that we can, and I believe that people are good people, if it doesn't always come out that way. But with cannabis, for example, I wondered what you think it can add to someone's mentality or someone's experience of the world.
Well, we know there are some wonderful medical aspects to it and to products derived from it, and that it is particularly comforting to those elderly people or unfortunately ill people, that it could give them some therapeutic value. I don't know a lot about that, but I know that's the case. And nowadays, the other derivative, the oil, I forget what it's called, TPC or something, is very helpful for arthritis and many medical. These are, all our medicine is all derived from the jungle. I mean, aspirin was the bark of a kind of tree. So nature, there's a tree in the jungle in the Philippines that the thorns of it can be poisonous, but the leaves from the same tree can cure the poison. So that's what nature is like. And most profound medical cure is derived from what we have naturally in the jungles, which is why it's important to preserve the jungles, because there are many more medicines that we haven't even discovered yet. And cannabis, of course, I think I was never a very druggy person in my life, and and I was older when I first had smoked what we called marijuana, and I was frightened of it, or my parents made me be very non-receptive to drugs. And other drugs, if I had sampled something or other, I always found it was too strong or I didn't like the effect, so I never indulged. Even, there was a time I remember when I was younger when cocaine became very popular and everyone thought there were no bad effects to it. That was its reputation, which is the opposite of the truth. It was a terribly destructive drug. But grass, for me, always, some people get relaxed when they smoke it and can sleep. To me, it's the opposite. It gets me very energized and very focused. In other words, if I were smoking it, I would become very focused on whatever I was thinking about. So it was great for evaluating a script. I would always because then I thought of nothing but what that script was in. It sort of really focused my attention. It's funny, as I get older, I don't smoke it very much, partly because I'm trying to stay thin. And when you smoke grass, as I said, you focus on everyone. Boy, that dessert looks good, I don't care. I'm going to eat that dessert, or I'm going to do all of this stuff that I wish. So I like to be more careful about what I eat. I lost a lot of weight, and it's very hard. It's easy. It's one thing to lose it, but it's hard to keep it off, because all the people who love you, who said, you got to watch out about your weight, they're the same ones that forced the food on you. They're always, everyone is pushing food on you, you know. I went to Duke Medical Facility in North Carolina, Duke Fitness Center, which was a wonderful institution. And when you see some of the people there who are like, you know, 400 pounds, I mean, it's life-saving for them. What else can they do? They're trapped in this horrible medical dilemma, and Duke really saves lives. But I was, you know, most Americans are obese. The percentage is outrageous. And the program, it's sort of like going to college. You learn about fitness, you learn about nutrition, and the more you learn, the more you're capable to navigate through those things. I didn't mean to talk about that, but that...
No.
You haven't noticed how
the
much
question.
thinner I am than I used to be. No, I lost about 80 pounds.
But in the meantime, you're obviously passionate about wine. So I was going to ask you, do you remember like the first glass of wine or taste of wine that you had that you fell in love with?
Well, as an Italian-American kid, I never, my earliest memory of the dinner table always had wine on it. It was just, wine was part of the meal. And they weren't fancy wines or anything. It was sort of more the equivalent of what a Gallo wine, and Gallo is good, sound, home-style wine, so I don't say Gallo in a pejorative way at all. The thing about those products is whether they're entirely just wine, and wine is very regulated as an alcoholic beverage, so wine is made from grapes, and that's it. Tobacco, for example, if you smoke a little cigar, the tobacco might be half paper. It's not olive oil. Most olive oil, you have no idea, unless it's California olive oil, most olive oil, you have no idea what's in it. And even some of the famous olive oil from Italy and France and Tunisia has got a lot of other stuff. California, by law, is 100%. So tobacco can be adulterated. Wine is not adulterated. Wine is they don't put extra stuff in wine, and so that's the beauty of it. Wine is very fattening, as all alcohol is, and it also loosens, like the grass, it loosens your willpower. So when you have, if you have a couple of glasses of wine, again, you eat all the dessert. At least I do. So I'm very careful with, I really pretty much nowadays have wine one day a week, because I don't want to gain the weight back. I'm 80 years old now, and if I look around, I don't see a lot of 85-year-old, 300-pound men I'm walking around. So I figured out, I got that message.
The first...
Oh, the first sip. Okay. The first.
I'd moved on.
As a young man, I was very fortunate to be sent to Paris by the film company I was a writer for to work on a movie called Is Paris Burning? And my colleague in working on it was someone I admired greatly, was Gore Vidal. And that's when I first sat around and had like a glass of a first growth of Chateau Lafite or Chateau Latour and tasted it. And more so, a glass of the Burgundy wines, what's the Romani Conti. I had a glass that I couldn't believe how delicious. Wine was never, as a kid, delicious to me. Coca-Cola was delicious to me, but wine was something everyone drank. I used to put ginger ale or 7. We kids were allowed to drink wine at table, but we put a little bit, and we put the ginger ale or 7 Up. That was a good drink. So, and we loved Coca-Cola, of course. But when I first had a glass of Romani Conti, I couldn't believe how delicious it was. And in fact, I was so impressed that I at the same time, once I was in Reno and someone had this kind of fine wine, but taught me how to play baccarat. And I didn't have any money at all as a kid, but I had, baccarat, you played with $100 bills, and I had $400, and I played it, and I made $30,000. And I decided to spend it all on Romani Conti. And I did. And so I ordered $30,000 worth of Romani Conti because I thought that was heaven on earth. But you can't buy more than one case of Romani Conti. You have to buy one case of Romani Conti, and then you have to buy 2 cases of La Tâche, and 3 of Echezeaux, and 4 of Richbourg, and then Grand Echezeaux. And so you get 15 cases of what is called the Von Romani. And so I bought 2 cases of Romani Conti, and so I had 30 at all those cases. But let me tell you something. Richbourg and La Tâche is also heavenly. I mean, it's all great. And that was the experience. That was the famous moment when I realized that wine could be so incredibly delicious.
A coup de foudre. The hotel that you first opened up was, curiously enough, a family home. So that must be...
No, it wasn't.
Was it not?
No.
Blankenau Lodge?
No. Blankenau Lodge is a very interesting story. It was built by a Canadian. It was the first lodge in Belize. It was built in 1960. He was a Canadian who, I should tell us a little off color, this story. That's okay. We're all.
Thank you.
This Canadian gentleman married, this is a true story. Did you ever hear this story? He married this young lady, lovely, his wife, but he had a problem with her is that she continued to sleep with everyone she met. And he became very upset about this, and so he decided to take her to a remote part of the world, and he chose this forest preserve in Belize, very beautiful place, but literally in the middle of nowhere. There were hardly roads. There was a beautiful river going through it, a small river. There was nothing. There was no civilization. Wasn't no electricity, no nothing. And he built this lodge, the Blankenau Lodge, the first lodge there, because he thought he would be isolated. He would keep this woman, this irrepressible woman under control. And he had like 5 little cabins, and he built that. But the problem was, whoever were the guests in the cabin, she would go sleep with them. So ultimately, he gave up. I don't know what happened to him, but the lodge then was there over. Did you ever hear that story? That's a true story. His name was Larson. And that was the wild and woolly days of Belize. So what happened was different people owned it, and in the course of this history, and it had an airfield, a little airfield. And when I was brought to see it, it was totally abandoned. And not only was it abandoned, but there was the wreckage of an airplane on the end of the airfield. We were still there, which had been owned by some drug runners. And they were trying to fly away when the police were coming and their plane crashed. And it was all like that. And I was brought to see it. This was after I had made Apocalypse Now. And, I sort of when you make a movie for 2 years, you become, they say that David Lean, after he made Lawrence of Arabia, couldn't bear to leave the desert. He had become part of his culture. And I must say the jungle is after you get used to it, it's a wonderful place. It's a very safe place too. You're safe in the jungle. At any rate, I wanted to buy a place in the jungle, and my wife said, "Oh, you just bought a winery. There's no jungles around here, so you have to pay attention to this winery." But then Belize was British Honduras, and they made it into a nation. And I took my son and this fellow, Dean Cavaleris, to go look at it, so maybe we could buy a little place in the jungle or an island or something romantic. But I was shown this Blankenau Lodge by an interesting character there. And I peeked in. It was all locked. I couldn't see it. But I peeked into the dining room and had a big, nice table. And I said that fatal thing I have said many times, which has caused me to do things, which is, "Oh, I could write here." So it turns out I bought it for like about, $20,000. I bought the lease. It was a lease for $20,000 or something like that. And I used to go with my boys, and it was really like, as I said, there was no electricity, and there was this beautiful lake, and there was this old pump that the motion of the river would operate this pump, which would pump the water up, and then that would flush the toilets and everything. But this pump kept breaking. And of course, my wife was not as romantically involved in this place as my boys and I, and when the pump broke, the toilets wouldn't flush. And So it was that kind of Swiss Family Robinson kind of experience. And ultimately, you know, when I want to get something done, on my birthday, I'll say, for my birthday, I want to bring my mother and my aunt and my cousins and everybody all to Belize to celebrate my birthday, knowing that they'll try to do what I want on my birthday. That's the only time when they try to do what I want. And I knew that by doing that, I'd get a washer and a dryer and you know, beds and stuff, and it would be my way of really outfitting the place. And I put in the first pizza oven that Belize ever had. I put in the first instant coffee machine, like an espresso machine, I put in. And it was pretty nice. But when it had stuff, it needed some caretakers to really be there, or, you know, next time you go back, it would all be gone. And if you have a place with a staff and you're a guy who says yes a lot, you'll be in the hotel business. And what happened was they discovered a Maya dig, a new Maya ruin called Caracol. And this little place, Blanqueno, was the closest destination to it. So consequently, it started to have people who wanted to be guests, and I found myself in the hotel business.
You mentioned your family, and family plays such an important part in your life. They've starred in your movies. You name your wines after them. I wonder if I could ask you, who's the easiest person in your family to work with, and who's the most difficult?
My wife is a wonderful person to work with. I've been married 56 years. My only misgiving about my wife is that she, which is not a misgiving, but according to the old Italian idea of what a wife was like that I saw in my youth, you know, she never did say love, honor, and obey. And consequently, she always was a very popular person. She was a sorority girl, and to this day, she has many wonderful friends and stuff. And you know, I, of course, wanted to be more exclusively the one who gets all her attention, which I never did. But the good thing about that is that in the morning, which I enjoy so much talking to her, because I didn't, nor did I ever control where she goes and what she does. She's always interesting to talk to. Even after 56 years, I always learn a lot from her, and I assume that's because she is out talking to people and doing interesting things on her own. So the benefit of a long-term marriage is if you can have a wife and friend who's always fun to talk to, and that means always interesting to talk to. That's a big plus. But you know, we complement each other. Well, she was in the arts. She was an art student of UCLA, and she's very knowledgeable about textiles and fabrics, and I've learned much from her in that area. And she was a great collaborator when the Blanqueno Lodge was the first of the Belizean lodges that was really beautiful, and for good reason, because Belize, if you look at the map, really is a hunk of Guatemala, and it really was. I mean, they don't like to say that, but basically the British sort of robbed part of Guatemala, and being that there's such good maritime people in shallow water with shoals and what do you call it when there's coral and reefs. So the Guatemala contingent, especially in the old days, were more like the Spanish. They could sail, but they weren't good pirates. The British were always good pirates. So there was an enmity between Belize and Guatemala, which probably exists to this day. And it was for good reason, because of what I just said. But we, loving Guatemala, Guatemala is a wonderful country. The people are so fabulous, they're so talented. And the fact that they really have these Indian Maya people, and they're doing such beautiful textiles and artworks. We just went to Guatemala and were in heaven, and we brought back all of this stuff from Guatemala and decorated the Blanqueno Lodge with it. And it gave it really, and that was not something the other Belizean folks thought of, because they always thought of Guatemala as their enemy. But we didn't know that. And so then later on, when Blancano was so beautiful, and it is beautiful, then many of the lodges in Belize adapted that, and they looked just like it, to the extent they didn't get the good stuff, though, because we took it all in. But that hotel was very popular, and then people wanted to also go and stay sometime on the beach. And we would recommend what we thought were the nicest. There were two nice beach areas in Belize. One is called Placencia, and that's more like white sand, more like beach, like we think of it. And then the other part is, what's that called? Ambergris, and that has a big sea tourism business. But so finally they said, oh, you would be better if we could make a place on a beach that was ours, so that we could send the folks from Belize to, they also want to go to the beach. They just don't want to be up in the beautiful serene mountains. So I went and saw a place and bought this beach. And it was a place called, it's still called Turtle Inn. It was Turtle Inn. It was sort of a interesting American sort of artist hippie place, and it was originally catered to young marine biology students. So it had many, when I got it, there were all these rusty microscopes. It was sort of like John Steinbeck, kind of thing. So we bought it, and with a very but I didn't want to make it like Guatemalan style, because everyone had copied the Guatemalan. So I had been to Bali, and I said, well, what if we give it a Balinese style, because those Balinesian people are sort of cultural cousins in a way. And so we did that, and we made Turtle Inn really a beautiful Balinese with the stone carvers coming. No, in the first incarnation, it was destroyed totally by a hurricane.
Oh, no.
And I got a phone call, they said, well, we have this problem, but we had a storm and it hit Turtle Inn completely. And I said, well, what are you telling me? Are you telling me it's severely damaged? They said, no, we're telling you it's not there anymore. So I went and surveyed that, and it was not there anymore. And then I had to make a decision whether I would rebuild it or just sell the land. And I decided to rebuild it, but really make it spectacular, which that's when I brought in Balinese stone cutters, and they did, and I wanted the bathrooms to all be like half inside and half outside, where you could be in the bathroom and then go outside in a private courtyard where you were private and you could take showers. And I like the idea of an indoor-outdoor bathroom. Bathrooms shouldn't be little confined outhouses. They should be out in the fresh air. And so Turtle Inn turned out to be really breathtakingly beautiful, if I say so myself. But again, because of hundreds of great collaborators, of artists, and these Balinesian folks came and stayed there for, 6 months. And so that was how that
I'm going to get into trouble because we're running out of time, and I
Yeah.
know that there's going to be audience, people in the audience who want to ask you questions, but I wondered,
Are we running out of time, or is time running out of us? Because we're talking about interesting things, but I understand.
then I'm very happy to keep on going. So I suppose it was almost like a kind of quick fire questions, in the sense that...
Go ahead, we'll do, I promise I will not be so long. I'm just remembering this stuff myself.
No, and I love it, but you're a kind of, a pleasure seeker and a hedonist, and you have these amazing talents in terms of arts and hotels and adventure and wine and weed. And so I wanted to ask you, what would be your perfect day? Imagine that age or weight or geography or practicality is no issue.
Well, I've been going through, as you would imagine, every decade you go through transitions. So I've been going through a lot of transition, and it reflects what I like to read about and what I want to write about. But let me put it this way. In the morning, I always used to take the envelope that my pills came in. And since I lost the weight, I hardly have to take any more pills, interestingly. And I would open it up, and I would always put my to-do list down. And what is a to-do list? A to-do list is mainly most of the problems you have to solve. So I don't do that anymore. Now I write a to-enjoy list. And basically, I've become really, for those of you who know the ancients, I've become more of an Epicurean, and people misunderstand. I think there's a magazine called...
Yes, there is.
It's about eating a lot.
Yeah, no, but it's about enjoying the pleasure.
Well, Epicurus was what it was really interesting, and his position was, yes, pleasure you want to go toward, know that that's good, and pain you want to avoid, but for him, pleasure is friendship, generosity, discussions about deep subjects. And also he believes that, when you control, basically in a nutshell, he feels there is no hell and this is heaven. And so if you're not in heaven, it means you're making some mistakes about what are your necessities or the way you're looking at it, because really don't waste being in heaven, which is where you are. And his feeling is like, don't dwell on, when you get troublesome thoughts, do your best to deal with them. Like I consider, like I'm in the batter box, and when I have the problem, I just hit it out as best I know how, and either take a shot at solving it or delegating it to someone, and then I stop thinking about it. So I try to only think about pleasant thoughts, of which there are so many. I live in a beautiful place. One of my most favorite ways is to enjoy the view of this little natural place and look at all the animals that come to visit. I'm like Snow White. The animals come and see me, birds. And so basically, at the end of the day, since all my thoughts have been so pleasurable, and my wife says, how was your day? I say, it was wonderful. But it's not that I didn't have problems, it's just that I didn't dwell on them. I didn't, Epicurus says that, that basically, things are delayed, and most people never get to really enjoy their leisure time because they're worrying during it, where you don't have to worry. You could be, and we don't even know how to designate pleasant time in the moment. We're either thinking about something we're going to do or something we had done, but you have to learn how to really find all the wonderful pleasure that's just there, as they say, in the moment. And I've always been a person who was excited about something I'm going to do. And now I try to be much more right there, enjoying it right at that time. And I'm finding it's a skill you can get better at. And another thing Epicurus says, necessity is a bad thing, but there's no necessity to live with necessity. You choose what is necessity. You choose that that car you had, which was perfectly good, and you wanted the Mercedes, you chose to get it and its payments. And in other words, most of our lives is totally up to us. And we sort of know that, but we're so conditioned, and we're also, I went to a recent conference where they were talking about serious, famous people and important people were talking about serious things. And one of the things they were talking about was like the climate, of course. Everybody there flew in a private plane. No one mentioned that as a problem. Well, that's what people are like and should be, I guess. But what was I was going to say?
Was this the Google conference?
No, I'm not going to say what it was anyway, because I just got in trouble. But my point is that, they were talking about the terrible, the issue of mental health and combined with gun control and stuff, and the fact that now every week we can expect a massacre. And I was looking at it, and they said it's very hard to measure the degree of mental health, but we have all young people, suicides has doubled and blah, 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 all these. And I was saying, you just measured it. That of course we're suffering through an epidemic of mental health disturbance. But let's face it, people are subjected to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of commercials which they're used to, they don't even think about, which are saying you're not okay the way you are. What is a commercial? When you see a commercial, it either says you're not okay the way you are, but if you had a wife who looked like Cheryl Teigs, you would be, or if you had a Mercedes, you would be, or if you did this, or if you took this pharmaceutical. I think it's outrageous that they advertise. You know, America is the only country in the world that allows them to, except for, I think, New Zealand. They never advertise pharmaceuticals on them. But this constant barrage of these commercials at you, out, made by arguably the best artists in the country, because it's a big industry, but what does it do to the mood of us? How does it make us, if it's telling us that we're not okay the way we are, and we would be okay if we made them richer, what would be if, I remember during 9/11, it was so extraordinary an event that the country was in shock, and they suspended commercials for like 3 or 4 days. Some of you are old enough to remember that. And I was like, suddenly, I don't know, I feel different. What is the effect of that constant bombardment, along with the violence in video games, along with the violence in television, along with the violence in movies? Along with news becoming a day-long entertainment with 8 commercials between, count the commercials on CNN or MSNBC, and the fact that they always make you feel some big event is just about to come to, but it never comes to head. It's just to suck you into seeing the 10 commercials. So I feel that I can imagine a future. I can very much, and that's all I think about, a future that will be paradise. I believe, my wife says, yeah, but people they want to be better than their neighbors. They want to have more privileges than their neighbor. I said, that's just a result of how the system has been up to now. People want to be friendly. People are generous deep down if they're in a economic system that permits that to happen. We're in a very, and so then I started trying to study about economics to see, is there any rules that really say that avarice and greed is really built? It's not, in my opinion, built into the human animal. We have been taught that by maybe thousands of years, or maybe just the last 200 years since the Industrial Revolution. But in a nutshell, I believe in a positive future. I believe we will achieve a positive utopia, knowing it means the place that can't exist. And I believe that it will come we'll see the beginning of it, because we're about to witness an extraordinary transition in what Aristotle called non-living machines. He talked about wealth gathering, and he said that wealth gathering is really something of households. You need so much olive oil, you need so much barley, you need so much this, so much that, but it's finite. Your need is, when suddenly it went out of household management into trade, for the first time, wealth gathering became limitless. And ever since that happened, all of the result, classes, the rich, the poor, the slums, the slaves, all of what we think are the worst things of human nature is really the result of a system that made production the most important thing, even to the point where produce all you can and then use marketing and advertising to convince people that they need things that they don't really want and don't really need, which is what we have now. If we were not looking at production, how a country's measured, gross national product, what if we rated them for education and capability and freedom, I mean happiness? Perhaps if everything were pointed towards, other than just more production, more wealth, maybe a lot of these unattractive characteristics would fade away, and we would live in the Garden of Eden. You brought that up. I believe that in our destiny, the human destiny is once again a kind of Garden of Eden. And it's going to happen because of technology, because suddenly there's going to be self-driving trucks and self-driving mines, or whatever there are, self-driving financial. Everything is going to be done by what I think Aristotle was referring to, windmills. And when he said, what did he mean by non-living machine? Must have been windmills and water wheels. But we now know what it is. It's robotics, it's AI, it's nano manufacture, it's 3D printing, it's the extraordinary capability we have so that people are not going to have to labor. People are going to be artists. People are going to be involved in a different kind, I think, different kind of future life that's much happier and without the stress. That's my 2 cents.
You're amazing, and I could talk to you all day, but I feel like I would be slightly stealing you if we didn't manage to take
Could we answer, if I do it quickly, 2 questions?
Yes, let's do it.
Because I know.
2 lucky people. There's a gentleman at the back.
Hello, I was just wondering if you have an update on your Rockford project.
Interesting. Rockford, I don't want to waste the time to explain it, but basically I'm very interested in Rockford. I'm interested in our winery expanding into sort of family parks, which is what we did in Sonoma, and which includes all the ages together. I think we can have, they tend to take the old people and they send them to care places, and the kids to here. I like the family and staying together, and so I am planning in Rockford, based around a minor league baseball stadium, a place that will have facilities that are relevant and attract all the ages to have a good time together for a reasonable, minor league baseball is one of the most inexpensive way a grandpa could take all his family out for a wonderful evening, and including a novel turn on senior living, which I believe in. So that's the project in Rockford, and our winery has bought this baseball stadium, but we inherited a lease, and we're really waiting for the settlement of that lease. I would like to start right away building it, and I don't have a lot of time to fiddle around with. And the soonest under the terms of the lease I can get them to vacate it would be about 2-3 years, and they're losing money, so we're trying to encourage them to leave.
Will you put a hotel there?
I would put a hotel. My favorite thing is the senior living, because I want to divide the spaces for the senior. Imagine have senior living and you could look out at a baseball game and you could exercise on the concourse. But the most important thing is that I want to have a percentage of the rooms or the accommodations built for college-age students, so that the young people get a very cheap deal to live there, and they take the older folks to the doctor and they help them with their computer. And what happens in that relationship is not that the older people become dependent on the younger people become dependent on the older people, and the older people in that relationship live another 6 years and are much healthier and active, because they say to the young, oh, that girl you're going out with, she's no good for you. The other one is good. Or when you make the tomato, put a fish head, and families are meant to be together, and that's the secret, I think. So that's what we're trying to do there. Okay.
One last question. Gentleman here.
You've accomplished so much in life, and you're still only 80 years old, as you mentioned. And now you've got this weight loss to take you another decades
I have
and
an
more.
uncle who's got all his marbles, who's 103. Okay. So he's my goal.
I hope you'll see that too. What have you not done that you'd really like to, some vision for something? You've done wine, you've done films, you've books. What is in your mind that say, gosh,
I would
if I
love
can
to- I
take the
would-
time, this is what I would like to do.
I would love to make a movie that is an incredible, heartbreaking, and lifting love story. I've made many movies, but I don't think I've ever made what I most love in literature, which is an unbelievable love story. That's what I want to do. I would love to do that.
I feel a bit teary.
I'm going to ask one more question, because the lady in this outstanding, I don't know the color, but it's plum
Fuchsia.
color. She had fuchsia. I remember fuchsia. Fuchsia and chartreuse were the bathing suits in the 50s. What is the question you asked?
I wanted to know, besides the Rockford project, what other hotels are you interested in developing, are you going to stick mainly to boutique-sized properties? And what other destinations are you looking towards in the future?
Yeah, I want to comment a little bit about that subject. I'll do it fast. I've tried. I once, as a kid, I flew in an airplane, and I was late in the days when you could just run on the plane and there was no security. And the stewardesses said to me, "Okay, honey, you're going to fly first class," because I was late and the whole non-first class section was filled up. So they put me in first class. And first class was unbelievable. They brought caviar, and I was a kid. I was 18 and I was 17, and they brought caviar and stuff, and it was really unbelievable on an airplane with first class. What happened? What happened is all the people who used to fly first class bought their own airplanes. So they don't fly first class anymore because they got their own first class in their private airplanes. In the hotel business, the same thing is happening, so that the so-called wealthy equivalent doesn't want to just go and get 12 rooms in the Copacabana Palace and then come down in the lobby and see 200 suitcases in the lobby of the next tier of rich people with the doctors and the physicians and so on and so. They want to have the whole, they want to have like the first class of the airplane. They want the whole thing. So that the boutique hotel of like from under 25 rooms, which happens to be more what we're like, the boutique hotel, the big thing is the buyout. In other words, it's like the private plane concept of they want to go there with their grandchildren, with the nanny, and they don't want anyone else in that hotel. That's what we're finding. So, in answer to your question, we are actively working on a new. Everything is a boutique hotel, meaning it's at least it's no more than 17 rooms, suites. They're all suites. So we are working on a new project in the French Quarter in New Orleans, but they haven't given a permit for a hotel there for 50 years, although I have tried for years and I was promised if I would do certain things, it would be forthcoming. And then, of course, what happened is the people who promised it left office. And so I am still actively trying to build a beautiful it's a beautiful area, the French Quarter, which you know, but very resistant and very much aggravated by the Airbnb phenomenon. It's driving them crazy. So that's one place. We are also thinking about a beautiful hotel, boutique hotel in San Francisco. Again, everything is permits and permitting. So basically we have a place in Belize on the beach, Turtle Inn. We have Blanco Lodge, beautiful place, the first one. We have one of my favorites, which is in Guatemala. I love Guatemala. I love Guatemalteca food. I love the people. They have been given such we invaded them in 1965 and put this army they've got. We put them in power. It's outrageous. So I love Guatemala, and it's right near Tikal, and it's one of my favorites, although it's the most rustic. We have a beautiful place, small, but very, very well rated in all the lists in Buenos Aires, in Soho, Palermo, Soho. We have an absolute masterpiece in the south of Italy, in Lucania, which is the Palazzo Margherita. That's the most spectacular, beautiful place. And I would do something in Rio. I like Brazilians. They're sort of like Italians without inhibitions. I like Rio, so I would do something in Rio, and I would do something in Argentina. We have a place in Argentina, very beautiful. I said that, but I would do something I love Argentine wine, and if I could have a combination winery hotel, I would do that. And I think then I'm definitely running out of time to do this stuff, especially when government permitting is involved. That really slows it down. Pardon?
South Africa has to be your last project.
Oh, South Africa is a beautiful place. Absolutely. Well, gee, thank you so much. I hope I didn't talk too much, but that's what you wanted me to do. Thank you.
sorry, I'm being contrary now, but one last thing. There's a magazine, just because Francis doesn't do enough, there's a literary magazine that he's been running for 20 years called Zoetrope. You'll find that in your bags tonight. It will be alongside a magazine called Condé Nast Traveller. But your guest editors are people like Iggy Pop and David Lynch, so we'll see who fares best.
This is a magazine only for short stories. And every issue has a guest designer, so each one is like a collector's item. So.
And secondly, I'm being contrarian, I'm being hypocritical because the one question you didn't answer. Who was the most challenging family member to work with?
Well, without a doubt, Sophia, but for good reason. Sophia is very small, she's very beautiful, she's very quiet speaking, very soft voice, but she's made of steel. And she, when Sophia has an opinion, and often it's right, nothing can, that's why she's such a good film director, because and everyone who works with her knows that, I mean, she's not that she doesn't explore and listen to collaborate. When she decides, she is steel. So I would say that she's the most of my family members to really collaborate with. Once her mind is made up, you can't change it.
Francis Ford Coppola.